You're listening to 17 Carat K-Pop. For more information about this show, as well as my other show, Enthusiasts, previously called How to Stan, visit 17caratkpop.weebly.com. And sign up for the show's free newsletter for interviews and much more at 17caratkpop.substack.com. Thank you! Hi everybody. Before you listen to today's episode, I do just want to express my sorrow and grief for those affected by the mass shooting in Monterey Park, California. Whether or not this is considered a technical hate crime, which the authorities as of recording time are hesitant to do, the facts still stand that, as California's Department of Justice reports, anti-Asian hate crimes rose over 177% from 2020 to 2021, and the area targeted was during the Lunar New Year celebrations in a 65% Asian American community. With a storied history, it actually became where the first suburban Chinatown was located in all the USA. The LA Times has some interesting background history and live updates on this story too about Monterey Park. So again, regardless of whether or not this counts as a hate crime or whatever technically, the climate of fear that Asian Americans have to live in now is still what this incident should keep our attention put back to. Go to stopaapihate.org, sign up for email alerts, stay on top of the fact this is happening, do not just tune it out after a day. You can also donate to help those affected by this tragedy with the Monterey Park Lunar New Year Victims Fund. There's also Classroom of Compassion, a nonprofit based in LA. There are also some ways you can help with trauma processing by helping support the work of Changing Tides and the Asian Mental Health Collective. Enjoy today's episode. Hi everybody! Welcome back to 17 Carat K-Pop. Really excited for the new TXT album, and I am so ready to dive into its deeper meaning. So much so that I thought this time, instead of sharing thoughts and theories right after it comes out, which I'll still probably do, but ahead of time it might help you think about things based on my theories if I lay out my initial thoughts before the release this time. So let me know what you think of this format of celebrating a release. But just like Thursday's Child last year, it's time for a TXT week on the show, with more coming to 17caratkpop.substack.com as well. MOAs, it is your time to tune in to 17 Carat K-Pop. There are a couple of different variables that TXT talk about overtly as sources of inspiration for this next chapter, the name chapter. It wouldn't hurt to go back to my Minisode 2 episode or the Starseekers episodes, but you don't have to understand the context, because part of this new TXT guide will be a quick refresher. But first I want to talk about their overt sources of inspiration for the name chapter. Part 1, let's get into what Faust is all about. TXT are taking inspiration now, and the literature they're referring to, and other relevant reading if you're interested, I will link to on my site and my Substack. But anyway, they're talking about the story of Mephistopheles and Faust. This story has gone through many iterations, but basically it all started with Johann Georg Faust, who had this biography written about him anonymously. Some anonymous author wrote about this German man in what may have been an autobiography or just complete BS. No one knows for sure, but it's called Faustbuch and came out in 1587. This book is a collection of stories about these wise men and what they get up to involving the occult. It's basically an oral history style mythology sort of passed down legend about alchemy and dark magic basically. It's also viewed as this precursor to stories like Nostradamus, aka Dracula, and other classics that have withstood literally hundreds of years. This book became essential reading to stay up with the times, just like everyone you know might watch the same show. At this point in Europe, everyone who could read read this book and were talking about it. It was the it book. And got people paranoid. There was a lucrative market then for life hack books about avoiding a similar fate to this character. How to avoid accidental deals with the devil. What to do if you accidentally sell your soul. Now that would be an interesting BuzzFeed listicle. So this story became a part of German folklore, inspired by this poser biography with questionable origins that just spread like wildfire. Breaking down the term, the beginning and end compounds make sense, referring to no or negation, and love or loving, so no love. The middle compound is what linguists have spent literally ages debating. Did the story mean the middle compound as in light? So the phrase would be not loving light. Did they mean it just as a self-reference, like not loving Faust? Or it could have just been about mephitic, a term for lethal vapors that come out of the earth. I guess metaphorically. Mephistopheles is now just an archetype, basically, that we see reinterpreted, given new life, reimagined in so many formats to this day. The traits of this character are incorporated into stories about the eternally relevant theme of making a devil's bargain, selling your soul to the devil. They talked about it kind of literally back then, got people in a panic interpreting it that way, but also now just very metaphorical and secular too. When you do something and it's a be careful what you wish for moment, you've doomed yourself moment, one where you did not see past a veneer, a mirage, and didn't fully realize at the time the consequences of what you were about to do. Reading about this character accidentally reminded me of some other hype artists, which was kind of funny, like the fact that a Shakespeare production references this character, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Shakespeare is frequently a go-to, quoted, paraphrased, in hyphens world. Then there's the fact this archetype is at play a bit in The Picture of Dorian Gray, a work that BTS has nodded to before. Plus the story Dr. Faustus took some inspiration from Nietzsche's life. We talked about Nietzsche's influence in terms of philosophy on BTS's story in a previous episode. Some of the many interesting takes on this story that all boil down to the same main moral. The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe from the early 1600s. Some self-titled versions of the story. One from 1725 is when the devil takes the form of a Grey Friar that is summoned to the woods where all this happens. A two-part play from the 1800s is just called Faust, and at the end of that version, his soul does escape, gets redeemed, so they twist the story to be more about redemption, reconciliation, forgiveness. Then there are other versions that just make it sound matter-of-fact, yeah, there's no way he's getting into heaven. No redemption for this person. Mephisto Waltzes is a similar story told by Franz Liszt, who you may recognize the name of because we talked about him when talking about just fandom history, period. Listomania was the OG term for fangirling, basically. Fangirling behavior. The first ever instance was towards this composer, Franz Liszt, hence the name Listomania. Anyway, even he got on this. That's how classic it is. One version by Klaus Mann from the 1930s puts an interesting spin on it, telling the story of this actor who embeds with the Nazis just to advance his career in the end. So he becomes super famous in Germany, but because of his Devil's Bargain. There is this show within the show format, which we will get back to later, is a very key part of the story because there's a show within a show, a play within the story. It's really meta. This character plays Mephistopheles in a play within the story, and that's when it really hits him, oh my gosh, I'm playing the wrong character. I don't see myself in this guy. I am Faust in this equation. There's The Devil and Daniel Webster from the same year. That's about a farmer. He sells his soul for 7 years of prosperity to help deal with a pitiful crop season and economic despair. There's a play called The Visit from 1956, in which the townspeople basically get bribed to kill each other. There was even a Faustian framework incorporated into UK politics in 1987. This 5-minute political film was going to be aired. A 5-minute attack ad, basically. But it was pulled at the last minute. There was fears of how much backlash it could get, especially because it was towards Tony Blair, a Christian, portrayed as Faust in their film. In Polish folklore, they focus on the fact he's a sorcerer who sells his soul. A version from Austria is about a 10-year pact with the devil, and on the last night of it, he's actually spared because the priest blesses him. There's a version from Denmark in which a scholar finds a hole in the church wall called the Devil's Hole that can never be plastered over, no matter how hard you try, and in there are dangerous instructions, a dangerous contract to read from someone's former soul selling. So many iterations, but they all go back to some similar themes, one being veils of illusion, tricks, mirages, deceptive scenes before you. A literally, this is too good to be true, creation of your mind, not realizing the hidden costs of what you're doing or where you are. Darkness lurking within a utopic, idyllic situation. Temptation and how the grander your illusion and the bigger the dream, the fantasy, the darker and scarier the temptation. It's about impulses, excess. It's also about flames, super symbolic in these stories, and just uncontrollable forces compelling you. That big question about how much your fate is truly out of your control, and how much can you redirect the course of your life. What have you already signed away in your life that you can't get back? And what can you still bargain for? How much redemption is truly possible? How much of what you do is free will? And how much is predetermined by fate? The thunder and lightning, the fact he arrives mid-storm, in many versions, is also symbolic, plus the bloodstains, and these scenes in the woods or at a churchyard at midnight. All key themes that come to mind when thinking of TXT's story so far. So it's not just the next chapter. They've alluded to Faustian themes before. The chapbook from 1587 about Dr. Faustus has really interesting conditions, the terms of this devil's agreement. They agree the devil will serve as Faust's servant, catering to his every whim, until 24 years are up. On the last day of the year, 24, he's dead. The devil takes his soul after that time. So you can live with the servant at your feet, but then your life is cut short. Some of the conditions are really something. Faust had to give up faith and sign a deal in his own blood. The devil would be open to offering Faust anything he desired, knowledge-wise. And the devil would promise to never lie to him. Okay. So Dr. Faustus, in this telling, lived a life of luxury and excess. He got everything he wanted. He was praised for being so talented, so intelligent, so impressive, with his horoscopes, his ability to see the future, to answer any question you had about any topic, to set out prophecies for you. This doctor was a professor, so as the clock started ticking, the end was near for him in this deal. He passed on a lot of worldly possessions to the students. Just before midnight, that final day of the final year, his students went to visit him, as a storm came in, to set the scene of course, and they found a freaking crime scene. Okay, graphic detail warning. When they entered, they found a freaking gory crime scene. Bloodstains, chunks of brain, an eye, teeth scattered, and a corpse outside the house later. So the students basically witnessed with their own eyes and had to learn in the most traumatizing way not to ever renounce your faith and make a deal with the devil like he did. Don't suffer the same fate, it's not worth it. And to this day, this legend has it that his spirit is still there playing cards. He told fortunes and played cards. That should ring a bell if you follow TXT's story. Another key symbolic story about Dr. Faust should bring to mind TXT's symbolism. It's called The Violet Garden. Faust is really flexing here. He is showing off, look at my talent, look what I can do. He brings the sun out, gets the winter frost to melt. See, there's a symbol already, you should know. He gets the flowers to bloom, the fruits to grow, and he creates this feast for his guests. But right before he says, go ahead, take a bite, he gets rid of the illusion. So as they're all positioned as if they each held up a grape they were about to bite into, it turns out now they each hold up a knife against the face of the person next to them. There are less intense versions of the story that kind of still have the same symbolism, but I would argue not as effective and notable, but in some tamer version, they do have just each other's noses. They got your nose instead of a knife when he pulls back the illusion of grapes. There's a separate story from the same iteration of the character who sets out a midnight banquet, and he is seen arriving by a road literally paved by the spirits that work for him. The devil, basically, paving the way and then picking up the road to not leave a trace behind. He's not paving a way for the future, literally. Another story of him is a professor. He once was talking about Homer and the Odyssey, and the students were like, you're so good at crafting these visuals, these vivid ways to provoke our imaginations, to understand what you're talking about, to describe and set the scene. It sounds so cool and intense, I wish I could see it for real. And so he makes it quote-unquote real for them, and traumatizes all of them. They get so scared, they're like, no, get us out of the Odyssey. This got way too real. Curiosity killed us cats, basically. Another interesting garden-related story. Lots of admiration for this beautiful garden he has, despite it being a winter month. But the admiration turns to concern because it's so perfect. They're like, this is so impossible to have this nice of a garden in the middle of winter. He's up to something shady, some dark magic. Something's afoot that's suspicious. He needs to find religion, basically. So they send this monk to go convert him. And there's a very fascinating argument made here. Faust says it would be immoral to not do what the devil wanted, because he made a contract in blood, promising to behave a certain way with the devil. And part of the contract included a promise to not be converted, to not see faith again. So he argues, actually, the most moral thing I can do is stay loyal to the devil right now, because I promised him something, and I have to keep my word. Long story short, the monk is just like, fine, be that way, literally go to hell. And he gets banned from the town. They also ban just any sorcerer of any kind from ever coming back. In one version, when someone tries to convert him, he sicks the devil on them to scare them. But then that man who tried to convert him and gets the devil sicked on him just has faith, and the moral there is to trust your faith, because he uses his faith to stay totally unafraid, totally unfazed by the sight of the devil. And the devil just goes back and complains to his boss that this guy didn't get scared, and I was unsuccessful at spooking him out, basically. Now here's a pretty shocking and terrible story with this character. In this story, he offers the court of Anhalt's pregnant wife a meal, whatever she wants, whatever her pregnancy gives her a craving for. He sets up this big feast following her request. Not only that, but he sets it up in this brand new idyllic castle he just conjured up, with magical animals roaming. Yes, it brought to mind Blue Hour. Then, psych, as they leave this beautiful, perfect afternoon, that was too perfect it turns out to be real, they turn around and see the tower they just left is up in flames, and the sounds of frickin' warfare are everywhere. They left Armageddon behind them. And this couple, this pregnant woman and her husband, look to him like, hey, help us, and realize he's disappeared. He left the destruction, and no other trace of him. Turns out the banquet had been an illusion, so to make matters worse, he also left this pregnant woman hungry. There's a funny version from the Netherlands where the devil offers this pact to be a servant for 7 years, but he's run so ragged and this guy is so insufferable that he's like, let's narrow it to 4 years. But he's like, no, I'm not doing that. And so after 7 years, then the devil is like, this was awful, and really gets violent in the way he just seizes his body and soars out of the tower window, dramatically at his wit's end. Here's another funny one, where the devil to me is just made way too human for comfort, which is maybe the deeper point. But anyway, that's another story. That's another rant I could go on. A version from England includes a story where the devil rides out on this dune horse on a literal sign. There's a big famous sign up with a picture of the devil riding this dune horse, and a tailor is watching from behind the horse. Then the backstory given to this famous sign in the book is that the devil made a pact with that tailor. And the tailor was like, wait, this pact actually didn't do anything for me. So it wasn't like a 50-50 thing. Can we have a do-over? And the devil says, sure, I kid you not. So he's like, my new wish is a horse, and I want you to ride the horse and never come back. And the devil obliges. He never visits Earth again to seek to make a contract with a new mortal. And this tailor just lives out his days proudly, going to this alehouse he founded to recall his story again and again. His heroism in driving the devil out of town, and now he has this big sign, symbolic of his heroism, out front of the alehouse. Okay, one more, I promise. This story out of Wales is really interesting. The short version is, there's this old barn full of crows, and the story is very uncomfortable because there's a literal slave and a master in it. But I will just say the key quote from it that I think is worth remembering is, false when living and false when dead. False when living and false when dead. The symbolism related to this story takes some interesting turns relevant to the Star Seekers, like the fact it seems pretty dangerous and concerning how much of the spellbook becomes visible to Star One. It's kind of viewed as not their calling to know that much about the book, which brings to mind to me the Book of Hell's Charms, supposedly written by this Faust guy. The rumor is that this book is dangerous to read. Read it forwards, and you summon the devil. Read it backwards, and the devil leaves. Read it forwards and backwards, you're free to go. Read it forwards or backwards, but not both. The devil will take care of the rest, they say. This dangerous-to-read book is under lock and key in a church. That's the legend. It's basically a guidebook to learn how to control the spirits, and it's thought to be in a church near the woods. The woods are a very symbolic key location for TXT and for this story. We will tie this together with more overt, clear TXT parallels later. But now on to part 2 of this breakdown of their influences, a refresher about Peter Pan. Peter Pan actually originally was not part of a kid's book. He was part of an adult novel called The Little White Bird, about a man who loves this boy so much, thinks he's so cute, and wants to raise him as his own. So he plans to kidnap him, and first gains his trust with stories of magical fairies and birds and stuff. Yeah, it's pretty creepy. And I guess the story was arguably less creepy when it was adapted into part of a bigger book. It was also then turned into a play called Peter Pan or the Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, which became the basis for Peter and Wendy. All this is the early 1900s we're talking about. Different iterations came out. The play was considered canon by the time it had 5 acts into its official storyline. But then new releases came back on the scene, full-fledged in 2008, because that's when certain, at least European, copyrights expired around the character. He's also, of course, taken over brand names for everything, from a line of buses, Peter Pan buses, to famous racehorses, to a seafood company. The term is also now kind of a psychological term referring to men who can't grow up, and the women who feel like they have to enable them, basically, are called the ones with Wendy syndrome. That's a conversation for another day. The point being that this character has stayed super relevant and brought up a lot in a variety of contexts, but it just started out as part of a bigger book, and it was odd and had many dark undertones in the original versions when Peter was 7 days old. 7 days. And he is described as, I kind of love this phrase, betwixt and between a man and a bird. So he could fly because he was part bird. He also hung out with the fairies, so he was socialized to speak fairy, speak bird, and fly like them. He flew away with everyone else who flew away. All the lost boys in this OG version were the lost kids who fell out of strollers and stuff, and their parents basically didn't go looking for them. And Peter in the original version flies away to Neverland because he thinks his mom doesn't want him anymore, because he leaves, and when he flies back through the window, he sees from above his mom's cuddling a new baby now. So he's like, guess she moved on. It's interesting that in some versions, they actually attribute his flight, his ability to fly, to fairy dust, like in the Disney version, and thinking good thoughts, magical thoughts, as opposed to being raised by the birds and fairies. But the author actually said the fairy dust component was just thrown into the story because he got so many complaints from parents. Like, kids left and right were trying to imitate this scene from the book and jump off their beds and fly, and they kept getting hurt. So he had to add the caveat, well, it actually doesn't work unless you have fairy dust, so don't try this at home. It's interesting that Peter's physical appearance is left very up to interpretation. The original reading of his character keeps the description vague, so kids can just sort of conjure up whatever image of a playmate comes to mind. And intentionally, the author worked with the influences of the style choices of oral storytellers. He wanted a conversational tone to this story to make it be like reading kids a bedtime story. The one thing that is specified, though, is that he has pointy elf ears. Note that for later, when it comes to TXT's world. Peter's age, notably, besides the early versions when he's 7 days old, is estimated around 12 or 13, a preteen. A coming-of-age year that also happens to be the age of the main characters in Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is the book that I theorized is heavily used as a source of inspiration for TXT's work. I dissect that in TXT Story Recap in other past episodes. The character seems to be named after 2 things. The Pan refers to, like, a pipe that he sometimes plays. There's a Greek god named Pan who is actually part goat and is meant to represent the natural world. This just most authentic self, being nakedly human. We'll get back to that. And the Peter is thought to come from the name of a boy who died too young, J.M. Barrie. His brother died just before his 14th birthday in an ice skating accident. They thought of him as this forever boy because he never got to grow up. He also seems inspired by a group of 5 kids he hung out with. He was kind of the not blood related but still the uncle for them. He knew their family well, they vacationed together. There have been some questions over time about the true innocence of his relationship with these kids. Did he just like little kids and their innocence and sweetness, or was there something darker, a la the Lewis Carroll debates? We don't have time to get into that, but it's interesting how much children shaped his worldview. And one of the kids was named Peter. Actually, I'll get dark for 1 second here. When the parents were both dead after a while, just naturally. I'm not saying he killed them. But then he changed the mom's will to make it seem like he was actually supposed to be their guardian after her passing instead of their nanny. So he did end up raising those kids after they died, after the parents died. So yes, he lived out the dream of the narrator in The Little White Bird. Peter's whole thing in the versions when he's not 7 days old is he flies through kids' windows to go ask them to join him, go on a playdate with him basically in Neverland, where everyone is in a dream world where they never grow up. Adulthood responsibilities are checked at the door, just be a carefree kid. He has a unique costume. In some versions it's made of vines, in some it's made of cobwebs, which are a notable prop in TXT's latest promo pics. He also has a red feather in his cap. The feathers are a key detail we'll get back to. The people he invites on this island, where he never has to grow up, honestly are much darker than I remember from when I was little. These lost boys who are there with him, like, they're basically held hostage because he's in charge of them. He actually physically manipulates them to help them pass through holes in trees and stuff. He directs their playtime. He calls the shots. He is the de facto ruler. It's kind of Lord of the Flies over there. And in some versions, he kind of alludes to killing them too. There's this phrase used in the original story, thinning them out, like he had to thin out the herd. In some versions, they interpret that as meaning killing them, like killing them off. And in other versions, they choose to say that meant just like relocating or banishing members because you're punished if you show signs of maturing. He lives on this magical island with fairies, mermaids, etc. Lots of pirates. This is described as kind of a dream world, like a literal dream. And it almost reminds me of the Polar Express in how it's described as a place no adults are allowed into. Like in Polar Express, you can't hear the bell when you're an adult. You grow too cynical and can't hear it. Kind of similar here where like the main character kids can go create a dream world. Their imaginary world can come to life before them where they play with Peter, but past a certain age they're no longer able to access that imagination. The main characters are the Darlings, Mr. and Mrs. Darling, Wendy, Michael, and John. The oldest of the three kids is Wendy Darling, the only girl Peter ever seems to be charmed by in this story. And some versions make that romantic, some make it just platonic, do what you will with that, but she's the one Peter really wants to hang out with, really wants to bond with at the least. She is very childlike in terms of how she talks about Peter Pan's world in her dreams. Like, she just matter-of-factly talks about it like, I don't know how I know, but I know what he looks like, I know what age he is, and I know he's my best friend. She also just seems very cavalier about the bizarre parts of the story, just calmly being like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, the mess on the floor was Peter leaving part of his vine costume behind that fell off last time. Some of the leaves he didn't clean up. Like, that's just a normal sighting. The dream world coming to reality. She does become older naturally, though, and she's been kind of trained by Peter to think of growing up as a sin. So she's like sobbing uncontrollably, feeling so guilty as she gets older. She now feels like her fate is predetermined. Notice the parallel here already. She can't stop it, she's let people down, and she's now in the clutches of a new, uncontrollable adult world that has its grips on her and will tear her away from Neverland, never to be allowed back in. Peter is such a child, though, and I forgot how insufferable kids can be at that age until revisiting the story because he is a piece of work. He's so cocky. He's such a little boy, and he doesn't really care about others' feelings as much as he should. Developmentally, he's not very mature, so he does take it personally and is mad at her for growing up and abandoning him. He wants to be in charge, he wants to make everyone believe in his dream world, and whoever he loves to stay there forever. And he also shuns any sign of growing up, any chance to develop as a person, to learn and grow, become a better person. He shuns because becoming someone else implies evolving, implies growing up, and Peter clings to childhood to stay the same. Mr. George Darling, the man of the house, is the epitome of adulthood, and Mrs. Mary Darling is much more compassionate and motherly. So, for example, when Wendy's an infant, money's tight, bills are stacking up, Mr. Darling's practically thinking, like, can we afford to keep Wendy based on these calculations? Meanwhile, her mom is more emotional, more focused on, we have to keep her, how do we make it happen, I can't give her up. He is very preoccupied with keeping up appearances, putting on airs, impressing the neighbors. He's very preoccupied with status, with money, with seeming to have wealth and power. He wants to be making it in the business world, be seen as a successful, incredible adult. He wants people to think of him as very mature, a very intelligent, hardworking man. There's this incredible quote in the book about him. He, quote, used to boast to Wendy that her mother not only loved him, but respected him. He was one of those deep ones who knows about stocks and shares, unquote. He also, quote, had a passion for being exactly like his neighbors, unquote, which is why they got a nanny. They didn't need one, but the neighbors had one. They wanted to keep up the act that they belonged. They were just more adults in this world, fitting in, being called childish, not a compliment at their age, but they couldn't afford a nanny, so they literally got a dog named Nana. Yes, a literal dog became the de facto babysitter of 3 kids. And then he worried about that too, like about what the neighbors think about picking a dog as the nanny. Quote, no nursery could possibly have been conducted more correctly, and Mr. Darling knew it, yet he sometimes wondered uneasily whether the neighbors talked. He had his position in the city to consider, unquote. They actually then blame Nana sometimes when the kids are thinking crazy talk. When at first they're like, why do they keep bringing up this Peter guy we've never met? They're like, Nana must have put the idea in their heads. This poor dog. So Mr. Darling, very, very preoccupied with the external world and external validation. Mrs. Darling is to an extent as well, because she doesn't entertain the childlike notions. There's some really remarkable descriptions in the book, different unique ways to describe a child's mind versus an adult's. And a child's mind is described as like a bunch of scribbles, a bunch of disorganized, super colorful, incoherent drawings. The map of an adult's mind is very categorized. It's more like a filing cabinet system as opposed to a floor cluttered with papers. I also find really fascinating the way the author describes parents reading bedtime stories to their kids, because he describes it as an interesting ritual, all about taking all those cluttered, jumbled, miscellaneous thoughts in kids' minds and putting them to bed as you put the kids to bed. Like the mom is tidying up their thoughts, putting all the files back in the file cabinet so they can sleep easy and wake up and their mother has relieved some of their stress through the story time. And that sometimes she's kind of putting away stray thoughts for them to put them at ease like a mother should. And as she does, she finds things she didn't know were there, like, where did this name come from? Where did this story come from? And she finds unique papers that her kids reveal upon it becoming bedtime. That's when she first realizes the name Peter is in their memories. It's a very interesting metaphor. Mrs. Darling is more patient and likable than Mr. Darling, but still kind of patronizing, just like, yeah, that's nice, dear. Nice story about Peter. But Mr. and Mrs. Darling really don't play a big role in the story, besides the bedtime story time. Like, they are very secondary characters, intentionally. The characters made easiest to root for, because they are the characters made the most three-dimensional, are the kids. Both the Darling children and the lost ones on this island, they enter a dreamscape into. Many quirky characters inhabit Neverland. There's Tinker Bell, this frankly very annoying fairy who's so jealous of Peter. Wendy can blink and Tinker Bell is plotting to drop a bomb on her head or something. She drinks this poison in a very Juliet-esque moment, although very dark implication there. So in the Disney version, she just is involved in a bomb scene, not a scene with poison. It's a long story. But her whole personality is jealousy, basically, over Peter. So it's interesting that these kids that emphasize the annoying traits of kids are also the characters that are given the spotlight the most, seemingly worth rooting for, because they just didn't know any better. They had the mind of a child. There's Tiger Lily, a princess who gets kidnapped, then rescued by Peter. She also gets kind of jealous in some versions of the story at Peter and Wendy's affection. There's the famous Captain Hook, Peter's rival. Ever since in a duel that Peter won, he cut off his hand, so Captain Hook replaced it with a hook. He leads a pretty incompetent crew, including the not very bright Smee, although he is quite loyal, and Starkey. Captain Hook's two big fears: one, the sight of his own blood, rumored to not be the typical red color. The blood symbolism is notable for later. And the crocodile. In the Disney version, they give him a name, Tick-Tock, because he swallowed a clock that alerts people of his approach, that he's on the horizon. Tick-Tock will not leave Captain Hook alone because he got a taste for him, eating that arm that Peter chopped off, and now he's craving the rest of Captain Hook. Since, for our sake, for the TXT applications, the parallels focus on the abstract themes, the symbolism, parts outside of the narrative, the actual plot. That's where I'll leave it, except I do want to summarize part of the opening and the ending, because they really summarize the whole story. Chapter 1 includes an interesting anecdote about Wendy when she was 2 years old. She saw a pretty flower, picked it up out of the garden, plucked it, and ran to go show her mom, and her mom said something like, "Oh, I wish you were this young and cute forever." And that's the first memory Wendy formed of having had a concept in her head introduced that she gets older. The first time it dawned on her that this life is changing and moving and will not stay the same. It's a very symbolic scene because of the flower and the garden. You know, she's blossoming, she's blooming, but also you've got weeds in the garden and you're killing something by plucking it up. And she's realizing the passage of time at a young age, very young. And actually, the story says that age, quote, 2 is the beginning of the end, unquote. Yikes. The story ends after the pirate kidnapping and all this other stuff happens, and then Peter rescues them. They go home like it didn't happen. They wake up the next day like it was all a dream, which it sort of was, and Peter is still a forever boy. A few other key details to remember before we move on to the overt TXT connections. First of all, Peter's pretext for visiting the Darling kids in the first place is that he lost his shadow and he needs to go pick it up. He dropped it off there. He also is again such a cocky kid because after Wendy takes it and puts it back on him, he takes credit for saving his own shadow. Another notable thing is how Neverland as a whole is treated as it shares a lot of traits from kid to kid, but they do personalize their own dreams, their own Neverland too. So each Neverland is part of the same whole dream world, but each kid has their own corner of it basically, personalized. In Wendy's, she has a pet wolf. She lives in a house of leaves. John Darling likes to live in a boat on the sand. That should bring to mind a TXT teaser for you. Really interesting quote about these shores of the ocean. Quote, "On these magic shores, children at play are forever beaching their coracles," basically their boats. "We too have been there. We can still hear the sound of the surf, though we shall land no more," unquote. I also want to reemphasize the thought of your parents helping you unpack intense emotions so that they're straightened out by morning. It just speaks to how kids and adults' minds are different, how much kids can rely on adults to help guide them early in life, and how much kids sometimes need a parent still to help them along the way. One of the many pros and cons together of still being a kid. You have someone to take care of you, but that's because you're a bit helpless. But after the bedtime story time, when they clean up your thoughts, quote, "When you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and evil passions with which you went to bed have been folded up small and placed at the bottom of your mind. And on the top, beautifully aired, are spread out your prettier thoughts, ready for you to put on," unquote. As we dive into part 3 here, pay close attention for the symbols that bring to mind Faust and or Peter Pan. About time, the passage of time, growing up, childhood, being childlike, signs of the devil, horns, storms, lightning, flames, all that symbolism, blood, shadows, the changing of the seasons, flowers, the special garden, the book, the mystery book, all that stuff. I will summarize all of this and clarify all the connections at the end. A quicker version of my previous rundown of TXT's music video universe. We were first introduced to the group with a special Morse code system, like a language all their own, all the youth's own language that only we know, with the Morse code message, dreaming. Their intro films also showed them just goofing off together, going on piggyback rides and stuff, and being a bit reckless, climbing on the roof, swinging from goals, like soccer goalposts, and a voice says run, but they kind of ignore it. They're just treating life like a fun, dangerous adventure. I will note that Peter Pan famously bragged that, hey, death would be another adventure. So that's the kind of childlike attitude they embraced at the start. The Dream chapter, Star, from 2019, started with another Morse code message, this time saying crown. Like they view themselves as like ruling their own world, turning their flaws into a crown. They're extra confident, and they kind of conjure up the image of how J.M. Barrie describes a child's mind. Very vibrant, colorful, full of 3D and 2D animations that seem kind of random. That personality, the vibrancy, the lack of caring about order or clear direction, that's their early day aesthetic. They have a similar one later in Blue Orangeade as well. Just a mix of vibrant colors and computer screens, that kind of questioning what's real. Cat and Dog, notable for the beach scene, as well as the star-shaped cloud overhead. Nap of a Star includes thunder and lightning, as well as butterflies that guide their way through the woods. And it's got this mix of aesthetics, this pop-up book kind of storybook look, like a children's story. That mixing of forms that they've done throughout their career, by the way. Dancing, different styles of music, different types of aesthetics and graphics and stylistic choices for the video filming. That variety of forms was a key part of Peter Pan's appeal all along. And that combination is present here. Nap of a Star was inspired by A Trip to the Moon, one of the earliest French short films in the sci-fi genre. And at the end of that movie, this astronomy club, they all crash into the ocean after their visit to the moon and get rescued on a ship. The presence of the waves in the boats, notable here, as well as the fact that movie intentionally does have that theatrical show within a show look, like the shows within shows that have been used to drill home the Faustian premise. The dream chapter, Magic, also from 2019, shows them similarly acting like young kids. Just goofing off, making the world their oyster, running around empty school hallways, swimming in the pool with their clothes on. They don't think long term. They don't think like, how are we going to clean the clothes? They don't think like, how are we going to get out or explain why we broke into the school at night? They don't worry about any of that. And they find this magical trap door at the bottom of the school pool, end up walking through this woods, but as they enter this Neverland of their own, they see the doorway back to Earth, back to normal life, go up in flames. Now that they're in a magical world, we see the return of it in Magic Island, a short film that shows them taking this literal magic subway ride. Travels at warp speed, this train goes to this purple flower-filled forest, among other places. 5:53 is the blue hour time, the time when it's sunset, and it's a very symbolic time for their story. And at 5:54, Subin's phone battery dies. Some of the words then on the screen include, "This voyage has gone adrift," and "This place here is our start line." So they want to have a do-over. You could also tell from the close-up flashbacks that they're reminiscing in a bad way. And we see a flash of fire, a close-up of an eye, a crash, birds, train tracks, the ocean. Symbolism later in the Magic Island film include the train again, walls of flames, and once they die, what remains is a forest of purple flowers, and when playing cards and a tie fall to the ground. The playing card made me think of the tent they would later have with the fortune teller and the cards in Faust, and that's a part of Faustian lore. And the tie falling to the ground seems to represent that death to adulthood that they also embodied in Good Boy Gone Bad years later, wearing those suits in the graveyard. Like they're so done with adulthood. Just stay forever in this place where we ran away. Now throw away all your weapons and just jump to the festival. They sing in Can't We Just Leave the Monster Alive? Can I please go back to where I was before, where there are no rules? They say in the song No Rules. Back to a type of life before adult responsibilities and expectations. They continue to need a friend to help them straighten out their minds, like kids may need their parent to do so, in the dream chapter Eternity. In the dream chapter Eternity, with the overall message of this era being, help me, see me, I need a friend to take my hand through this. I can't do this alone. They struggle though. Their struggle in Can't You See Me from this era seems to be that they want to hold on to that reliance on friends and outside of themselves reliance. They want others to help them through dark times to the point where they aren't realizing how much they are capable of helping themselves. But they are maturing, and it's a traumatic thing like it was for Wendy to do so, but they are, and they're resisting it, and it's getting intense. Their scrapbooks and memories are up in flames. They're saying about the friends don't understand them anymore. They're saying save me repeatedly, but they're saying you're turning your back on them. And they literally sing Gone in a Dream, Abandoned Island, that forgotten memory. They seem to be willing to do anything to not become an adult, and so they become pumas instead, basically. Wonder, what if I could become an animal the whole time? Still in that get me out of here, childlike way of thinking. Like, instead of solving something practically, I'm going to solve my problem by generating a totally new fantastical scenario that's probably also probable if I make it so. They sing in the dark, the door opens. So they're willing to go into a new chapter, but it's not leading anywhere good. And the symbolism's pretty clear in this story. The cave with the red light, the chains and leashes on them. Lots to unpack in the eternally short film, including repeating "Save me" at the end. And the line, quote, "determined by fate to play the role of the everyman," unquote. They're growing up and now they're like, guess it's my destiny to just be like everybody else. To feel that need to keep up appearances. They're wondering really like, do we have to stick in this boring adulthood? Do we have to grow up and become jaded and be like everybody else? They ask, quote, "Are there no other choices for us?" unquote. They seem to go through very dark sides to their own Neverland, with flashes of lightning illuminating 2D details, like Yeonjun has horns, like the devil, Huening-kai has bat wings, etc. Subin has elf ears, that's really notable. Also, they have these very thin, blink and you'll miss it strings. They're each held up by like a very translucent string in one scene here. They are puppets tied to strings in a way, which they are once again, more obviously though, in the new name chapter video. So they're on Neverland, where anything's possible, but that comes with being a puppet, still needing adult supervision some way, in your head or literal. You're floundering on your own. You're not ready yet for some stuff. They seem to leave Neverland, leave this dream world, and go back to practicing in the dance practice room. The lights flicker, they snap out of it, and they're back like, acting like nothing happened. They didn't just go on a wild adventure, it was all a dream. That's also very childlike, right? The second an event ends, you're moving on to the next thing like it never happened. 1 minute you're sobbing, the next you're not. Subin looks down and sees the magic die he rolled earlier is still in his hands. An allusion to this all being a game, quite notable. The final text on the screen during this short film, quote, "In the blink of an eye, the boys felt like they've returned from a long journey. The widening space between us, scribbles that unfold before our eyes, wade again through this dream. In fear, the boys asked, was it all nothing more than a dream? The boys did not know that this was but the start of the chaotic turmoil," unquote. The TLDR version of why I've been saying Something Wicked This Way Comes is a big influence on TXT's story is because that story revolves too around symbols like lightning, a midnight hour, a library setting, as well as this magical carnival and carousel that comes to town that is magic and helps you age backwards and forwards. Here it seems to have a different type of magic effect, but still represents that childlike intrigue. Blue Hour is interesting in the ways it's subtly hinting that there's a darkness on the horizon. This Neverland too is tainted a bit, like it's adulthood and the darker real world creeping in, reminding you, this is an illusion, don't trust it. The fires are coming to the tower you just built, if we're doing the Faustian analogy. This won't last forever, and the temporariness is what leads to the underlying discomfort, because it could be gone in a blink of an eye. And here they are in this magical carnival world, dancing and singing in a field. Everything's bright, sunny, happy, magical animals, larger than life moments, or moments where they're kind of shrunk down. It's very Wonderland-esque and whimsical. But some moments when the camera zooms out, we realize it was all a perspective shift. It was a matter of perspective, not real. Like the Ferris wheel and stuff, other parts of the carnival are not tangibly there. They were painted on a giant canvas, with purple paint, notably. At the end, the carnival shuts down and the lights go out, and they walk away from the scene. In the song Everlasting Shine, they lean into the spiritual analogies here, with lyrics like, there's no clear distinction between angels and devils. The world is full of contradictions. Navigating the waves, pretending we're not broken. Just doing these things makes us tired. They talk about fate and allude to expanding their definition of what is allowed to be fate in Force. Quote, the force within the inevitable. It's a meeting like never before and never again. Higher we can fly before the day comes when I eventually lose sight of it, unquote. The dream chapter and Minisode are over. We now enter the chaos chapter. Fight or escape, with the overall theme being you are frozen in time, and when it starts melting, when things start moving again, it's a terrifying thing. That's what the concept trailer basically represents. The frozen in time location starts crumbling, like ice falling from the ceiling and stuff, and they're trying to avoid getting hit in the head. So it's a very messy moment, a turbulent time in life. And they feel like, as the title track is all about, that the only anchor holding them together, helping them cope through this turbulent life phase, is love and who they love. That key anchor is someone else to be there to rely on. Again, something a child needs, some sort of anchor. We all need love, but I'll get to that. They also seem to go back to some spiritual phrasing, talking about you as a savior. Their one love and guiding light, being a savior. So holy, they say. They also admit, I won't be able to get into heaven. I don't belong there. They talk about this endless darkness, a world of zero, a messy life, couldn't even win a game of chess. They also say, I know it's real, I could feel it, which just brought to mind for me now, Wendy Darling, being like, I know Peter is my age, and I know what Peter's like, and I can't explain why. I can't show you proof, I just know it. I can feel it. They know this love is real. They know for sure, they don't know how. They know this person will be there still when they open their eyes. They also keep talking about a world of zero, a world that seems to mean nothing without you, which kind of gets to the essence of the Faustian stories. This sense of, well, you got what you wanted, but at what cost? Do you appreciate what you gave up at the end of the day? If not, you probably didn't give up the right things. To give in to vulnerability for love, that turned out to be the right trade. And like in those stories, they get rid of worldly possessions, albeit maybe not on purpose. Loser equals lover ends on a literal cliffhanger. The car goes off a cliff, the car is destroyed. They keep singing about losing and bleeding and fighting, running, just going mad, just admitting this is all fate, I'm destined to be a loser, whatever. It's happening, can't stop it. They sing about broken wings, falling, sinking. Notably, there is a nod to Days of Being Wild in the Loser Equals Lover video. When Yeonjun does that solo dance, it's a nod to the scene in Days of Being Wild when the main character does his own little solo dance. Only in TXT's version, rather than dance to the mirror, Yeonjun's dancing to his memories of his friends. They're not really in front of him, but he's visualizing their images back. In Days of Being Wild, it's actually an interesting parallel to the OG Peter Pan story, because the main character struggles and believes his mom doesn't want him anymore. When he finally finds her, she won't let him in, so he has to have a different kind of life away from her. And he views himself like a bird, but without legs. Inability to walk. He can fly, but never land. Neverland. See that? That movie also includes a phone ringing that goes unanswered. Just seems like a symbolic detail considering a phone booth is prominent again in Good Boy Gone Bad. In Frost, they sing about continuing this moment of transport. Like, they can take this portal to Neverland, but they're starting to see the error in that go-to more and more. That no matter what they do, they can't escape fully the negatives in life. They admit on the teaser poster, quote, I don't know about the faint voice. What is my fate? Unquote. They also sing, quote, that small island, enclosed in a veil, in my soul overwhelmed. I'm hollowed out once again. I'm in chaos now. Drawn by the name, I stand in chaos. My fate is what? What's the right answer? An unfamiliar name, meanings I don't understand. On Dream Island, only chaos exists. I run but sink deeper into dread, frozen before the name. Am I ready for this? Fateful shipwreck, suspended time within it. I'm dying. They take on another selfish kind of childish view in Ice Cream, because Peter does not use the more empathetic adult train of thought. A key milestone when you grow up is when you start to recognize the self, psychologically, as different from the other. And once you recognize the other, then it's part of growing and maturing to then take care of the other. Be able to then view the world outside of the lens of the self. Peter can't do that yet, so he always views what happens as personally bad for him. It's not just Wendy's growing up and that's sad, it's Wendy personally is hurting him. How could she? He takes everything personal, life is all about him. Also explains why he treats the Lost Boys like frickin' property. In the song Ice Cream, they talk about, quote, I think in the end, I am the unhappiest one. I feel like I'm the only one that's been robbed. It's unfair. I'm going to pray for being able to do small evil things. I wish for things to be unfair for everyone. They're really complaining about things melting like a dream, melting out of their mind, basically. They can't hold on to these memories. And ice cream is then an analogy that actually has a negative undertone. They admit to being childlike in Moa Diary, saying, you're in my secret. So what if it's childish, like us? They also remind you to remember our code, like the Morse code that started this all, the secret language you share, for being Neverland inhabitants together. Dear Sputnik references flying through the sky. What if I had been that puma? Has a ton of lyrics about, this is so frustrating. I don't know the right answers in life. A or B, what's going on? Is life really black and white like this? What am I supposed to pick? I'm overwhelmed. I have a headache. I don't know. I just want to skip all these questions. Growing up is putting on me. They let apathy and whatever, screw it, I don't care. Growing up is too hard. That mentality in anti-romantic, like, whatever, love will be a waste anyway, and it never lasts forever, so they're basically the liars to me, and it doesn't make sense. It's also interesting to read into the lyric, at the cashier, red line, like you're wasting your money on your loved one. But it's also notable, they're using the color red to talk about like a red flag in a relationship, mixed with the money metaphor, which they've used to talk about getting older. Both metaphorically and literally, money becomes a bigger part of your preoccupation as you age. For understandable reasons, but also for the worse at times, because you're making decisions not based on love or other stuff, but you have to based on money. More confusion about what on earth I'm supposed to do, feeling like your world is just screwed in no rules. But in new rules, they get excited and optimistic by the possibilities that come with no rules, using interesting, seemingly contradictory metaphors like transparent shackles. Also, I don't know if this was intentional, but I like the lyric about grabbing life by the handles, because they're referring to like grabbing the handles of a vehicle, the reins, that kind of thing. But also the handles like social media, Instagram handle and stuff. That's how I read it. Minisode 2, Thursday's Child. This era, I talked about at length before on the show, and in an essay all about the song, Thursday's Child Is Far to Go, on my Substack, 17caratkpop.substack.com. For now, I feel the need, though, to just reiterate the broken mirror and the stomping on roses in the teaser pictures, and the ways they talk about being Thursday's child, being at this transition point, not quite the weekend frivolity, but not the fear that comes with the Sunday scaries or Monday either. They also said Trust Fund Baby was kind of inspired by gaming and trying to win in a game. Trying to view life as a game, to get a handle on it, to get a lay of the land, see if there's a rule book. That theme is back. The Good Boy Gone Bad video, lots to read into. We've already talked about the suits, the graveyard, the flowers on top of garbage bags, and they keep saying about, look, I'm done and I don't care anymore. With lyrics like, I spent hours in front of the mirror wanting to become you. You kept dumping me. I just kill me with all that stress. I just don't care anymore. Erase that boy inside of you, then fill it with the wreck I've become. I'm like a zombie dead alive, born atop the tomb of love. I like it better now. This completely altered face of mine. I just kill me with all that pain. I just don't care anymore. Love is a lie. Head first with broken wings. Doesn't hurt anymore if I fall. I like being bad. They're pushed to the brink emotionally after a breakup, and they have a long way to go. Like the nursery rhyme and their song say. Like, yeah, we're close to the weekend, the end point. But there's also a significant way to go still. And this final stretch, this transition into adulthood, is really rough. We still feel like there's so many mountains to cross over, so many roadblocks to tackle still. And it's really hard to process all this right now, especially because it's post-breakup, and the love of our life was what we viewed as the only anchor, and now that's gone. They also bring up again the concept that fate may have other plans for them when they sing, Walk and Face Your Destiny. Opening sequence, very powerful lyrics, especially in the Peter Pan context, about seeing vivid memories and wishing you could go back to that time. And in Neverland where you dance with me, take another chance with me, despite I'm bleeding painfully, and it's faded film with a gaze that erased me. The memory is so sad. I cry. Countless memories fade and dissolve. Stop this from running through my head. They also reference the shadows. It's a really big song, way more than what first gets your attention. They're so beaten down emotionally, and they just can't stop these negative Neverland memories from coming back. They're just too sad to revisit. Once again, resorting to apathy in Trust Fund Baby, saying, I don't want to play the game anymore. The game's rigged against me anyway. I don't have the money or outward markers of a successful adult yet that would win me a romantic interest. So I just won't even try. There's no redemption for me. They actually use the word redemption. Like in all the devil bargain stories, is there a path for redemption? No, they think, just quote, a paradise for the losers. Slow Rabbit said in a Weaver's magazine piece, quote, Good Boy Gone Bad is sort of like the gasoline that starts the fire for the direction the songs in the next album will take, unquote, which seems to make sense. And they picked up this story with that short film teaser, the story of Peter Pan, and talking about feeling tempted by the devil. They compare the devil's temptation to a sugar rush, a short, quick, instant source of gratification that in the long run turns out to be illusory, a short-lasting high. So now they continue to try to figure out, fine, maybe we can't stay in Neverland forever. So then how do we learn to face that fact and make our real life livable, manageable for us, maybe even fun? And so I think at this part in their story, they're going to do that with short-term vices. And over time, they'll realize what's really a lasting high, a lasting natural high to cope in this scary adult world. But for now, they're in for a ride with the sugar rush. They go into this new era still as puppets. They go through a doorway into this new era. Now they're flying. In this chapter, in the teaser film, they think they're going to have to die or jump as their house tilts over. It's going to collapse, they have to get out, but they realize there's a third option. Don't just die or jump, you can fly, and they can. But then we see they were just lying on the floor that was in their heads. They are really just overtly kind of emulating Peter Pan now. Continuing with the theme, I think, of just figuring out how to make peace with who they are, their inner selves, not needing other people to guide them so much anymore. They can trust in themselves to be their own best friend, their own mentor. They seem to represent that new, mature realization as they pick up these mirrors and dance with the reflections, line up with them, walk into them. They're reuniting with their other sides, the sides that did not refuse to grow up. The teasers also use notable keywords and props, including that beach and ocean, the boat, nightmare, temptation, promise, nowhere, unmagic, and down to earth, which is ironically the sign highest up on the row of signs on a pole. Now for character arcs. Yeonjun has antlers or horns. He's kind of playing the devil, or has in the past. He's had dark forces attracted to him, like the ones who gave him a scratch without even touching him in Nap of a Star. He also in his intro film had that teddy with him, his symbol of childhood. He continues to be the most tempted to fall for the illusory appeal of Neverland. In Runaway, he was the last one to hold on to that memory, holding that stuffed toy and watching the door go up in flames, long after the others had gotten up and left. He's also first to reach the top of a cliff in Puma. He sees an old, bloodied version of himself in a ditch in Section 3, Promise. Promise is also now a keyword in their new era. He also, in the past, has used purple paint, which then was dripping from him as he was sitting there unconscious. He's been drawing his own world, creating his own imaginary world, but that didn't end nicely. He also did that solo dance scene to his imaginary friends. And now he's trying to really kind of just escape his life with this fast-paced motorcycle ride and this frustration he has at his need to evolve, to get out of this rebellious phase, but he can't help it. He likes being bad. But he does throw something at the sign that says Thursdays on it, like a business. But he throws at the sign indicating he's Thursday's child, like it's mocking him. That's that childlike spin. You view things as being personal attacks, basically. So he's kind of having a tantrum, basically. He's a devilish character trying to figure out why and how he can move past the devilish instincts, the grip the devil may have on him. Subin's character seems the most in his own world still. He doesn't let other people in, so he may be the most mature, can handle the most on his own, more independent, but of course it comes with drawbacks too, to not look to others for help when you need it. He looks miles apart from the others in the Eternally short film. He realizes he's stuck in this glass box, way far away from them, despite at first it looked like he was just paling around next to them. That was kind of an illusion. He has the book as his key symbol. He's got his headphones on a lot. He seemed to get the dark view of Neverland. When he holds up his book, the magic bewitched book, locks eyes with Yeonjun, who suddenly looks bloody, and Subin falls backwards with fright, he was startled, and sits up and wakes up in that practice studio like it didn't happen. He saw the dark underbelly of Neverland. He again, more than the others, sees through the veneer, sees through the illusion. He's read up on it. He understands the what's at stake. He keeps getting flashbacks later to that night at the carnival, where for him, it's not a happy connotation. It's not a happy memory. It's of an abandoned little boy, a ghost girl, someone who no longer can be with him. And the words on the screen at the end of the flashbacks are, "I always tear up after waking from a familiar dream." He later has a physical manifestation of his pain with that bloody arm, the smashed mirror. It's very dramatic, very intense. Huening-Kai's character is like the Faustian character who is the potential for redemption, not eternally doomed, not destined for damnation. He has mechanical angel wings at some points. He also goes up to this small staircase to nowhere, like a stairway to heaven, in the sky. Possibilities are out there for him, which he does struggle sometimes to reach, though, like the glass box he's stuck in Puma. Taehyun seems to also be more aware of the dark side of the illusion. He sees through the veneer, a lot like Subin. But he has a more optimistic spin on it, with quotes like, "We will find a way," but he admits, "What have we done wrong? Eternal dream, the deepest abyss." He sees that, careful what you wish for, basically. He's the one who finds Yeonjun unconscious, the purple paint all on him, entering a new trance-like state. And he's like, what are we doing? We need to focus now on making our waking lives better, not just escaping into the dream, because that is not sustainable. Then, Bumgyu, the character you most root for that keeps being onto something, and then something doesn't happen. Like when he steps on the book. He doesn't learn from the book, but he steps on it and walks away. Or he just dodges all those arrows, literally, in Puma. He finds the flowers, but sets them on fire. He's contributing to his own symbolic downfall. He's so close to getting the right answer, a way out of his fear and negative state of mind, but then he makes the wrong choice. But then he gets reckless. Actually, earlier he didn't care for the book either. He was the one carving a big space into it, like it was just a big cavernous thing. He also doesn't seem to register how much he should be focused on the present, because after all the massive short film hijinks, he's the one still holding his phone and preoccupied with it. A key takeaway from the Something Wicked This Way Comes parallels is that you can use that magic carousel to physically change your age, but mentally, you are the age you are. Even the magic carousel can't change it. So even in that story about trying to hold on to youth as long as possible, you can't always, and there's part that's inevitable. You can resist all you want, destiny arrives all the same. That story also has a big bottom line that friendship is a key tool in their arsenal, that they couldn't get through this without the yin and yang effect of working together. They juxtapose each other, they balance out each other's strengths and weaknesses, and the two young best friends get through this thanks to each other. And that is interesting because it brings up the point that this is not about, okay, when you're a kid, you lean on other people, and you're officially an adult when you don't have to rely on anyone. No. The point is when you're an adult, you realize, like them, that you needed each other. You don't turn to them before trying on your own, but when you can't do it on your own, you're mature enough to recognize that. And you reach out for help and see the value in doing so. It's willing to be vulnerable without embarrassment. That's maturity. And so TXT's story is about not learning not to rely on each other, but not as much and not as a go-to. To solve their own inner problems, then be able to bring to the table a bunch of important skills and growth, just improvement. The self-improvement leads to group improvement, and they can help each other. The point is, TXT are struggling because life is very complex and messy. Peter Pan is all about black and white thinking. You're an adult or you're a child. Any single step into adulthood is terrifying and the start of a snowball effect, a slippery slope. You're never returning to this world. There's a similar black and white thinking in the devil stories about, all right, here's what you get, but you get the absolute amount. You get all you wanted. All you wanted. No strings attached. Or you die, basically, when the deal's over. It's very black and white. So TXT are learning life isn't black and white. And their whole story is about struggling to accept that. The messy nuances of life. And the lack of clear, straightforward answers that you get as an adult. There's no guidebook for this. That's what's scary. Note that their tour for 2023 is the Mirage Tour, about how what you think is a totally heavenly experience, that's not true because life isn't black and white. There will be conditions. It also reminds me of Van Hyphen's story, the whole come inside the castle, take everything you want phrasing. The Palace of Temptation has a secret dark side. So similar to TXT's story, the Faustian tales are about the need to be wary of absolutes, giving up absolute freedom, absolute longevity, whatever, in exchange for absolute power. Those stories are also about the identity crisis one man has, and just how hard it is to find peace from within. It's also about finding a way to not totally make peace with your surroundings, because you need to better yourself, but also not succumb to despair and think, well, I'm destined by fate to be a loser forever. So finding that shade of gray in life is part of TXT's story too. Here it's about how do we live in a way that isn't selling our soul outright to eternal damnation. There's gotta be a better way. It's ultimately about the inevitable tragic end to your life story if your story stays self-serving and focused on short-term gratification. You're self-destructing by being short-sighted and closed-minded. The whole "the devil made me do it" phrasing, you know? No, he didn't. At the end of the day, you did. And taking responsibility, that can get messy. I really like this quote from that story. Her faults were mine, her virtues were her own. Her faults were mine, her virtues were her own. Just a very interesting way to think about your impact on people. Are you rubbing off on them the right way? Are you taking credit for the wrong things? The stories are also about selfishness being a route to loneliness. The trappings of short-sightedness. These legends also concern instant gratification, the need to feel like, why can't you just do this? Just change the world in your image. Just create a new castle. Just conjure up this illusion. What's the worst that could happen? It's a story about trade-offs in the disproportionate lengths we are willing to go for one trade-off over another, what this says about humanity. It's about status, social status. On Faust's journey, he meets A-listers and brags about it a bit. It's a very performative trip. Nothing happens. It's a very empty visit to people like Helen of Troy's spirit. He actually says, quote, a great show, but only a show, unquote. When he was focused on things like Mr. Darling, the cynical stuff, the putting on airs. I'm just gonna say it. Faust was like a frickin' capitalist PR agent. Such a good PR agent for capitalism. All about these turning unproductive things productive. He said the animals who are lazing about all day should basically not have wasted potential and be put to work. Plus, you could go into other schools of thought about, Karl Marx called it a devil's bargain, like capitalism led to the powers of the underworld being opened up and you can't go back. That's a whole other episode, a whole other show. I'm just saying, the need to exploit resources, the need for instant gratification, the need for material things, that sense of greediness, that's a common theme in these stories. And TXT have addressed that in their work too. What money can do to warp morals. So how does Peter Pan fit into this? Well, understanding what it takes to grow up and what it takes to be a child, when it can be good to hold on to your inner child, and when that's destructive, what elements of that you should leave in your past. That puzzle is messy, ongoing, it's quite a process, and that's what TXT's story is all about. And that's what, if you want to bargain with the devil, you should keep in mind. You're acting like a child in terms of short-term thinking that doesn't go far enough to really evaluate. Some of the ways TXT have been tricked by illusions, by illusory promises in life, are because of the times they were acting most childish. The cons we'll start with from being childish. Peter Pan is selfish. He can't empathize well with others, so he doesn't treat them right. He does not reach key psychological milestones, and so he can't cope well with change. He also sees other people as his game pieces. Like he is in a game, life is a game, and they're not three-dimensional humans. He's also short-sighted and impulsive. He thinks rules don't apply to him, and he feels invincible, like he can live forever. Danger is exciting rather than cause for caution. He's bossy and stubborn. He just wants what he wants and refuses to change. He cannot distinguish nuances in feelings. So if he's sad, he's sad. If he's mad, he's mad. He can't be like, wow, I get the gravity of killing this bug differently than killing a person. Like, that doesn't really register to him, that difference. It doesn't sink in for him what he's doing. He cannot distinguish between imagined play and real play. Everything is pretend play, therefore everything's real to him. He also feels like, at the end of the day, no one can stay mad at him. He's just a kid. So his dark side he can separate from, like he left his shadow behind, like it's a coat you put on and off. There are pros, though, of being a child still in many ways. You can be open and experience things for the first time. The sense of wonder and curiosity, excitement at the world feeling brand new, contagious enthusiasm, and joy for life. Before adulthood can leave you feeling monotonous, cynical, jaded, life can take a duller color as you get older. They believe in magic and the impossible. Logic is silly to them. Like, why can't I just say the answer is unicorns or whatever? Like, why not? Why not? Why not? They don't feel the need to check off a specific box, A or B, as TXT put it. Ignorance is bliss, so they're not as cynical about the world because they're spending time in their own mental happy place. They can shirk a lot of annoying adult responsibilities. In Neverland, you don't have to worry about the chaos that comes when your world feels like it's melting and shaking as you enter a turbulent new phase, because you don't enter any new phase. You're stable in childhood. You also have just youthful health and dexterity and stuff, strength, physically. And it's interesting, again, the undertone, because Peter Pan, the story within the story is that Mrs. Darling has heard of Peter Pan, but she doesn't know where her kids heard of it. She's only heard of it in the context of the legend, that he helps guide, hold hands, and walk with little kids to heaven to calm them down and help them find it, so they're not lost or scared. Yeah, it's pretty grim. So it's interesting that this story within a story that is Peter Pan has nuances to it despite the fact the main characters refuse to recognize them. It shows the characters do grow up against their will despite the fact they try so hard to make life stay very concrete and unchanging. And the book emphasizes how, yeah, they can hang out in Neverland, but they all have to leave sometime except Peter. Then why don't we focus on accepting and enjoying our time outside of Neverland? Peter can never do that, and as much as that is meant to, at some points, like the Disney version, right, makes you feel excited, like it's very cute and whimsical. I want to live in Neverland forever. Peter's actually a pretty broken man who can never grow up, and I think the story was meant to be sad in that way. Like, you don't feel like you want to be Peter or his friend. You want to help Peter get out. It's Groundhog Day meets a bunch of other stories that are just sad. Everyone else is growing up, they're learning and growing and becoming better, and he's an insufferable preteen boy. So TXT in this chapter, I think, are going to focus on staying out of Neverland. Out of the trapdoor world, out of the world the portal leads to. They're going to find ways to try to get out of there and make peace with just like IRL. Do more internal reflection. Try to figure out what parts of their inner child are worth nurturing and keeping, and what they gotta discard because it's self-destructive, and now they're finally seeing that. They're seeing growing up for the messy process it is, not the mirage they once thought of it as being covered in. Seeing through mirages is the theme of the day, ultimately. Seeing beyond your initial thoughts. Seeing them more in depth, in different shades of gray. That's an overall theme. It's a hard reality, but something we have to live with, about how complex life is and how everything we do has pros and cons. Those realizations are what all of these examples today talk about. So that's my read on where TXT is at, just analyzing their discography, looking at it side by side with their sources of inspiration. There are many more ways you could interpret their catalog and their applications of these literary inspirations. These are just my thoughts on it. I hope this was an exciting little primer for you. I'm very excited for the new era. Really compelling storytelling from them, as always, and I'm always glad to be your study guide to better understand their incredible world building, because there really is so much to it. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the new release, and I'll talk to you all again very soon. Bye, everybody!